welcome. We are going to spend the next few hours talking about electronic source data and clinical investigations. The FDA has come to us with guidance on this after a few years back and forth of what is expected of us in terms of electronic source documentation. And we have seen expansions on this when we look at ICH E6, R2, and discussing the requirements for keeping our data regardless of the type of media that generated our data. So what we'll be talking about today is looking at the initiatives and the regulatory climate that led to the eSource guidance, 3 tiers of data management that are incorporated and reflected within the guidance. We'll look at the clinical investigators' responsibilities for data origination, integrity, review, and release for processing and retention of electronic source data. We'll also look at the implications on the guidance on source documentation practices and policy. What we're actually doing now, we've adapted certainly since this guidance has come out. We still see folks that have hybrid systems and don't always consider how do we make sure that our paper-based systems are aligned with our electronic systems in terms of integrity and retention requirements. Look at the FDA's expectations as well as their inspection processes for electronic source. So what is a source document? Really, when we think of source, it is understanding that source documents are the documents that are used to supply information that goes into the case report forms, whether it's electronic or paper-based, that makes its way to the sponsor and ultimately to the regulatory authority, or the FDA in our case. So they are the source for the information that is reported. And this can be from humans. It can also be from automated instruments. It can be information that is procured throughout the course of the study from people or equipment. And we need to make sure before we start our studies that we clearly define what our expectations are for source so that we know that those systems are available and in place. And this is one of the things we run into. I'm an auditor as well, and it's one of the things that we run into when we audit, that information is not there. Oh, well, we didn't realize we had to have this, or we didn't realize that this platform was not appropriate. We have to consider before our study starts, what kind of data are we trying to capture? What is going to be critical for us, and what are our expectations for the integrity of that data? So records. We know that the FDA requires us all to maintain documentation. Investigators are required to maintain adequate and accurate case histories that record observations. Sponsors are required to keep documentation, as are our IRBs and our labs. Everything that we need to be able to show the FDA what it is we are doing, have been doing, is going to be critical. And that's why it's important before that study starts to kind of map out, if we need to get here, what documentation do we need to have to show how we achieve that goal. The FDA likes to say, of course, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. What we are doing in clinical research is maintaining that giant lab notebook, if you will. And someone has to be able to come along behind us and get the same results that we get when we're conducting our research. So FDA tells us that regardless of whether it's a paper or an electronic system, we have to ensure that that data is reliable, that it needs to be verifiable, because the FDA needs to be able to assess it for them to understand whether they should approve this product based on safety and efficacy data. So what is the FDA going to ask? We're going to look at some excerpts from the FDA's Compliance Program Guidance Manuals, how they train their inspectors to go in and do inspections of sponsors, CROs, and monitors, and clinical investigator sites. That's our primary focus. They certainly have information that they're looking for at the IRB level as well. So are you familiar with the FDA's Compliance Program Guidance Manuals? Give me a green check if so, please, a red X if not. These are 7348.810 and 7348.811 for sponsors and investigators, respectively. Need to know what we want to send out. Okay, all right. We'll make sure that we get those to you. So these are the FDA's compliance program guidance manuals. This is how they teach their folks to go out and perform these inspections. And they give us insight into what they expect us to have when they show up. So if we build our systems to that, we're in a little better spot. So Compliance Program Guidance Manual 7348.810, this is how the FDA will inspect its sponsors, CROs, and monitors. And they talk about collection and handling of data. They want to see your written procedures to assure the integrity of safety and efficacy data collected from investigators, both domestic and foreign. And we know that the FDA is focused on the integrity of the safety and efficacy data because that is what they use to determine whether or not they can approve that product.